Welcome back, Left Reckoners. David here, joined as always by Matt Leck. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing well, David. Good to be back with you.
And I am thrilled to be having on the podcast two guests today, Nando Vila and Rose Reid, the hosts of the excellent new podcast, Shoot the Messenger. Thank you all so much for coming on here.
It's good to be back. Love to be a return guest on Left Reckoning. I feel very honored. Rose, this is your first time.
Don't worry, time, David still just as honored.
Yeah, but don't worry, they'll be very gentle.
A privilege and an honor. Thank you for having me.
Oh, we sure will. It was a no-brainer to get y'all on. When I saw Nando announce this new show, I immediately jumped on it, and I was hooked from the get-go. I mean, this is a really fascinating story that y'all are covering here, and I mean, it touches on so many different issues, and I mean, there's so much to sort of get into. I'm just putting this up for folks so they can check it out. Again, it's Shoot the Messenger: Espionage, Murder, and Pegasus Spyware. But this is a story about surveillance. This is a story about censorship. This is a story about journalism. Could y'all give people just like a very quick, brief outline to understand what the podcast is about, and then we can jump into some of the more specific details?
Sure. Well, we started the project. Nando had this idea for doing something on the Committee to Protect Journalists, doing like what is the biggest threat to journalists today. And very quickly after doing a little bit of research, I think that it was really clear that cybersecurity, and more specifically this insane, sophisticated military-grade spyware made by an Israeli tech company, is one of the biggest threats that we're seeing today. And the show kind of has like this Russian doll like entry point where we start with the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And like just by pulling on that thread of his inner circle that had Pegasus on all of their phones, we go deeper into the spyware, the company that makes it, the industry booming around it, and kind of get farther and farther into this web. And it's really complicated, complex, and big. And like you said, it's really juicy and totally shocking.
Yeah, the original genesis, our chairman, like Rose and I's boss, is on the board of something called the Committee to Protect Journalists, like an excellent nonprofit that really does amazing work all around the world. Like anytime a journalist gets jailed or harassed or whatever, they're like on the front lines of advocacy to help them out. Like, do you remember when that Jacobin journalist was jailed in Turkey and things like the Committee to Protect Journalists just like jumps on that kind of thing and immediately mobilizes to lobby the State Department and things like that. So we were talking with them about doing something around that broad topic, that the sort of threat to journalists around the world. I think, I know that this podcast and is a very much focused on international affairs, has a very kind of global lens. And one of the challenges is like it really is hard, to get reliable reporting from a lot of conflict zones and things like that, especially as the news industry here in the United States and all along the West is kind of being decimated by larger structural economic factors. So we were talking about this, and I brought Rose on to help me. Rose is just an amazing producer, and it was like a kind of that scene in the movie where like she had like a billboard with all like the different journalists around the world, and at the center, all of the threads led to Pegasus. You know what I mean? It's like, oh my God, this thing is at the nexus of a lot of these cases.
And it is something that's like, not that this stuff didn't always come back to the U.S. before, but like one thing that has been sort of like notable is like, as we'll talk about in a second with Khashoggi, it's like, the actions of governments abroad like really are coming into the United States, right? From what happened to Khashoggi to like, even, I don't know, just talking about Turkey, like I remember a few years ago, like the Turkish embassy sent out thugs to like beat up protesters outside Turkey, which I don't know, felt like such a big opening up of norms internationally. But maybe to keep this a little focused, like Could y'all remind folks about who Khashoggi was? Because I think that some of our listeners might have been reading his work at the time, and some people might only know about him as the victim of this really brutal murder.
Absolutely. Jamal Khashoggi was a Saudi journalist, and he chose self-exile after years of kind of intimidation by the new crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, in Saudi Arabia. When he left Saudi Arabia and he moved to DC, he was really committed to continue writing and to use his voice. I mean, I think choosing exile for anyone, I mean, I don't think we really think about it if we haven't faced it, but he left behind his family, his friends, his everything. And so he really felt like, okay, I have to commit to really talking about the Middle East and talking about Saudi Arabia. And at the time when he left, like there was so much happening in Saudi Arabia. The crown prince, the new crown prince, MBS, that's like his nickname, like at one point rounded up all of like the media tycoons of Saudi Arabia and put them in like a Four Seasons hotel and kind of had this huge shakedown of like loyalty, assets, or both. And Jamal Khashoggi, miles away, thinking he was safe, really kept writing quite diplomatically in his Washington Post, op-eds, columns, like about what was going on in the Middle East. And when he was in Turkey, he was thinking about maybe moving a little bit closer back to home. He was homesick, looking at Istanbul as like a new place to live. And when he was in Istanbul and he was with his fiance, and this gets complicated because he had more than one love interest, but for this conversation, he was visiting his fiance in Istanbul and went to the consulate, the Saudi consulate, to get paperwork so he could marry her. And he never came out of the Saudi consulate. It was October of 2018.
I mean, I was just going to say the moment where who's waiting for him outside the consulate?
His fiance,
and realizing
Cengiz, a Turkish scholar.
Yeah, and it closes, and the people are like, "There's no one else in there," and and then let us know how we found out what exactly happened to Jamal behind the closed doors.
A couple of things happened within a period of a couple weeks. His fiance, Hatice Cengiz, waited outside all day and pretty much all night. She started calling journalists. She called journalists at the New York Times. Nando and I had the chance to interview the Istanbul bureau chief for the New York Times, Carlotta Gall, for this interview. She was there on the scene the day after. And essentially, a couple of pieces were put together where, and this is wild, Turkish authorities admitted to the world that they had bugged the Saudi consulate. Yeah. Now, they released these tapes. They're pretty horrific, and they shared them with the United Nations so they knew to let the world know what had happened to Jamal Khashoggi, that he was murdered when he walked in.
And I mean, just covering the brutality of this, the silencing of the journalists would be, interesting enough in its on its own. But I remember one part of the episode when y'all were interviewing one of the journalists there. And she was saying that, for a lot of people, it was like, okay, well, we know that he was killed and we sort of know who did it. But I wanted to know like how it ended up happening and all these other things. And central to this is this thing called Pegasus. And, for our listeners, could you all help people understand what Pegasus is? Because it's quite a worrying, thing.
I mean, it's maybe the most terrifying technology that I can think of. It is a bit of spyware that can take control of your phone. And this isn't like a Podesta phishing link situation, he was an idiot. That was like the most obvious thing. This can hack your phone without you doing anything, really. There's no trap that you have to fall into. It can fully take control of your phone. When it's off, it can turn on. It could see through your camera. It could record on the mic. It could see all your keystrokes, look through all your messages, your emails, your DMs. Basically, complete access to your phone without you having to quote unquote make a mistake, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? And again, it's a private company. It's not a criminal organization or anything like that. It's a private company, totally above board, totally legal, and they sell their technology to governments who it works on a sort of kind of like a subscription service. If you get the $29.99 tier, you get this many hacks a month. If you get the $299.99 tier, you get that many hacks a month. And basically you can you just have your pick of the litter of like this phone number, this person's phone. I'm just gonna take control of it. It really is just it's a new level of digital surveillance. I mean, I think it really is kind of just a great leap forward, if that makes sense, in terms of how vulnerable we are. Like, you can't even take steps to protect yourself, really, outside of not using a phone, which, like, who can do that these days?
Yeah, well, especially anyone connected in like a journalist or something like that who like desperately needs like that technology to work. I mean, and like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like, I mean, this thing like gets really deep in there, like so much so, like obviously can do all these other things like spy on you and record and all of that, but like it also like prevents like updates so that like the phone doesn't change. And
exactly.
I mean, it really,
maybe that's a good thing, though. Those updates are pesky. So maybe that's a silver lining of getting Pegasus.
I mean, I'm gonna rush to update my phone every time now in case it might wipe out things.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway. Well, what's kind of amazing about Pegasus, and some of the people who study it, really comment on its brilliance. But imagine, you're what's called a vulnerability researcher for the company that makes Pegasus. You're looking for a way to trip up the code of, let's say, an Apple phone or an Android, and basically, and this is a quote from the NSO Group, the company that makes it. They're looking for, quote, a silver bullet in their, quote, cat and mouse game. Like, they want to be able to take over as many phones as possible, with like a software, like some kind of like little trip. It can like trick your phone for just long enough, like your phone is overwhelmed, that this like spyware can weasel its way in with like a exploit process, and then be able to really work on your phone and like you say, like prevent updates. And also it has like a self-destruct mode. So if they think, if the code is like tipped off, in some respect, it can have like a self-destruct, like disappearing act. So it's not only a sophisticated way to, break into your phone and to like monitor everything on your phone. It uses your phone in a way that you can't even use it, like a computer, like looking at old deleted things or saving files or rummaging in ways that we don't even really rummage on our phone, and like export that data. But it can also like disappear if it needs to.
I mean, it seems to me like it validates the sort of ultimate paranoia about all of our connective devices, right? I think a lot of people have been operating under like, just don't put it in writing. Like, there's probably something, and it's like these sort of exploits. Like, I think you call them like 0-day exploits. And so, I mean, talk about that like as journalists, but also like the revolving door of them hiring folks who originally like were trying to code this like secure system, but actually I know a few workarounds that make me very valuable to these sorts of contractors, which the main people they sell their services are to government. So like, how private really are they? Like, what's the benefit of this private? But I'm just curious, like that paranoia element. I mean, if you guys want to comment on that for us.
What do you think, Nando?
Well, I mean, it's just
you've been blowing the whistle on this for a while.
If you're doing anything remotely uncomfortable for a government or really any sort of power center, it's not that you can't put it in writing in an email, or a text. You can't even be in the room with anyone's phone to even discuss it. I mean, that's the level of paranoia one must have if one is doing anything that is even like, I mean, obviously, in theory, this is meant to catch terrorists and criminals, but as we've seen, it's being used all the time against activists, trade union leaders, anyone who's just uncomfortable for someone. Like, you can't even, you might as well. I mean, it is the ultimate kind of form of silencing, because the only real solution is to basically go off the grid, in which case you're disconnected from any sort of social movement or social change. It's really wild. And then just the fact that it's in the hands of a private company, a for-profit company, whose only clients are governments. I mean, it's the same exact dynamic played out with, like, Raytheon or whatever. That the incentive is always for more and more and more, because that's profit under capitalism. We all know this, and the capitalism we all know and love. So the incentive is just to spy more and more and more, because I mean that's they just have to keep growing, and it's really, that's the long and the short of it. And it's just it does feel like a almost like a total control mechanism.
And like, if you think about it, like in terms of like the arms race between like privacy and like spying, I mean, it really does seem like Pegasus is so much more advanced than, like, journalists, like they use things like Signal or like, all these precautions.
Get out of here.
And it's just like,
get out of here.
It's completely
you're
working
cute
around
with your little Signal, your little Signal key on your Twitter bio. That's cute.
Yeah. In a way that's like tremendously worrying. And as you're saying, like, even if you are, super switched on and like never accidentally get this on your phone or whatever, like just being around somebody, and like in the Khashoggi, just to get back to this for a moment, like in the Khashoggi case, I mean, it was all around his social circle, this Pegasus, right?
Right. I mean, we may never know if Khashoggi had Pegasus on his phones. His phones were confiscated by, they were taken by the Turkish authorities after the murder from the Saudi consulate. So, over 4 years, and his phones are supposedly still with Turkish authorities. But Pegasus has been confirmed on the phones of his fiancée, Hatice Singez, in Istanbul, who was waiting outside for him the last day that he was seen alive. On his, he also had a wife in DC, who's now in DC, from the United Arab Emirates. We interviewed her in our first episode, Hanan Alater. She discovered she had Pegasus on her phone in 2021. So she had it on her phone for 3 years, including the last 5 months of Khashoggi's life. And Khashoggi's friend, a fellow journalist, like a Saudi dissident living with asylum in Canada. So he was living in Canada, which, so far from Saudi Arabia, and he had this Pegasus on his phone, and they probably saw what's calculated over 400 messages between Khashoggi and Omar Abdulaziz in Canada in the months leading up to his murder.
Yeah, I mean,
I know it boggles the mind. The other thing about Omar Abdulaziz, who's still really outspoken, he has an incredible profile on YouTube and Twitter. The Saudi government tried to get Omar to go to the consulate in Canada. And Omar, and this is like on CNN, but Omar WhatsApped Jamal Khashoggi saying, they've brought my brother to Canada. They really are pressuring me to like go to the embassy to like get a new passport and have a conversation. What should I do? And Jamal Khashoggi wrote him saying, I wouldn't trust them. I wouldn't go. But yet he went. And who knows what we do for love, but it's a wild story.
Can you just talk about the reaction from like the Canadian or U.S. governments to this sort of thing? Because I know both are allies with the Saudis.
Wow, I mean, it's really complicated. Yeah, What do you think, Nando?
Well, there was that kind of brief outrage, but it was all just essentially toothless, right? I mean, they've just kind of accepted it as a fact of life and moved on, and I think people have made the point that there's like this big focus on Khashoggi, mostly because he just happened to work for the Washington Post, and there's plenty of other people who are targeted who get a fraction of the attention. But it just, I mean, it's not that Khashoggi is more, has more worth or anything like that than anyone else. It's more that it just shows the absolute brazenness of it. Like they used to be a little bit more afraid of this kind of thing, and the fact that they were able to just off this guy and basically suffer zero repercussions, like zero, not a single thing has changed. I mean, the United States under a Republican administration, now under a Democratic administration, still supporting the war effort in Yemen, still firmly allied to Saudi Arabia. Just absolutely no, like nothing. It was uncomfortable for a little bit just from a public outcry standpoint, but not nothing in terms of a meaningful reproach from the state. And again, I just think it's the whole thing. The Khashoggi murder was a like you said, David, like a new frontier, it seemed, in terms of the brazenness. But I think now just the sophistication of the spyware. I mean, this is such a high profile case. We're able to, devote resources to it and look into it. But one wonders, just how many people are out there that are getting snuffed out even well before they get to the level of provenance of someone like Jamal Khashoggi.
Well, that's the thing, because I fully, like, I love that you guys are doing this in the Society Protect Journalists, but like at certain points, like, this is governments. Like, if the United States government and Canadian government can't say to the Saudis or to Israeli spy companies, this is not acceptable, if they're not going to do much beyond say, we'd rather our journalists don't disappear in your embassies. Like, I mean, I guess this is the best thing, the next best thing we can do then.
Well, there is one thing that I'm learning more and more about as I do this, which is, one key piece that Pegasus is linking between unlikely allies, like, let's say, Israel and Saudi Arabia. And one of the things that we saw with the Biden administration granting immunity to the Crown Prince in terms of this lawsuit that his wife Hanan al-Attar has brought, in the United States. I think what we're seeing is the strength of this anti-Iran alliance, which I wasn't super familiar with before this project, maybe like vaguely in like abstract terms. But when you think of why we would grant immunity to the Saudi Crown Prince at this time, and like what Israel is really accomplishing with selling Pegasus to like these kinds of actors like Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or Belarus. There a lot of these efforts are part of this anti-Iran alliance, which just really surprised me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that is always like, it seems strange, but there is like this new grouping in the region of what might seem like,
thanks to Kushner, man. Kushner did it.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Donald Trump said this was about world peace.
But let's talk a little bit more about the company behind Pegasus, because this is really interesting. Like, if you could give people a general sense of like who they are and where they come from, and also, like, I just think one thing that is like notable about them is because of the stuff that they're working on. This isn't just like some purely free market thing in the sense of like, oh, there's a company out there that you call up. Like, this goes to an intermediary, which is like the Israeli government.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead, Rose.
All right. Well, the NSO Group, when it was founded in like the late 2000s, like one of their pillars of like their foundation is that they work with the Israeli government, comply. Basically, the Israeli government has to approve every sale. Because Pegasus and the other products that they make are classified as cyber weapon, war weapons, or that kind of military grade weaponry. That's like what Pegasus falls under. So, the Ministry of Defense, like the government has to approve every sale. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things the NSO Group does is really operate in secrecy. They really kind of either to sound the alarm of like, we're doing everything we can. We watch, we can shut everything down, but they also play the card of like, we don't operate the portals. We don't know everything that our clients are doing. So they kind of play both sides, but we are still finding out where we can deduce information from that relationship that they have with the Israeli government overseeing their operations. But there's still a lot that we don't know about that. But it's really fascinating. And I think one thing that we're seeing more of is with Netanyahu, when he makes visits, we sometimes see Pegasus in that country that he just visited. So we're seeing kind of this like foreign diplomacy chip in a way that Israel maybe is doing some kind of, let's call it a new friendship or a new relationship with people with countries that they didn't necessarily have a relationship or alliance with before.
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny to hear them speak also when you hear the interviews of the Pegasus founders, because they're very they sound like, Silicon Valley like startup guys, and that they're like, we started this company with mission to change the world, and we're here to make the world a safer place, and blah blah blah. Like, like everything has to be couched in these kind of lofty ideals, when this is just like the most nefarious thing like one could be engaged in. But they still have to couch it in that, like, no one believed in us, no one thought we could do this, this is really like revolutionizing security and making the world a safer place. Pegasus has saved tens of thousands of lives, and untold, thwarted terrorist attacks and things like that. And it's like, man, just chill and just be, like, if you're selling to governments, why do you have to you could just be in the shadows, like you don't have to go on 60 Minutes. And talk about your company, just call up the government of wherever and be like, I got this technology. I'm sure they'll buy it. You don't need to do marketing that well.
Yeah, I wonder if Raytheon is like pitching themselves in the same way.
That's a sad sort of progress, because like Tim Sherrock, the Nation writer, has a thesis on increasingly privatized intelligence. And instead of that leading to us being less spied on, it's just them acting like venture capitalists as they spy on us even better than like we could ever dreamed like 30 years ago.
Totally.
And it's also like, not that I'm too worried about having Saudi government secrets exposed. Like, there's also this other factor there too, where like, if all these other countries are, using Pegasus is sort of, aware of activities of like clandestine activities of a lot of governments all around the world, which is just a strange thing to think about, a private corporation operating at that level, almost akin to governments.
That's an excellent point. I mean, one of the largest clusters that they forensically have been able to group is the Catalan independence movement. So politicians and activists and lawyers connected to the pro-independence movement in northern Spain and Catalonia. That's more than like 65 phones. And that's like the biggest cluster we've seen so far. And it's not 100% confirmed, but the likely government is Spain. So
I'll take my chances on that bet being, I'll take the over on that one.
But I think you're seeing,
no one gives a shit. No one else gives a shit.
I remember WhatsApping Nando being like, is it okay if we talk about northern Spain?
I love that it's like actually like, some like Stalinist group or something, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we have like, they're privy to a kind of to efforts that not only to these political movements, but an extension, people have likened your phone to like an extension of your mind. Like maybe they've been able to put a bug in your lamp or under your bed or, in your phone, but none of those places are the connective tissue of all of your relationships, your journaling, your emails, your work, your finances, your passwords. So it's really much so they're able to, they're privy to a couple of like, categories that maybe have previously, like been segmented before.
Well, I really highly suggest people go and listen to Shoot the Messenger, because it's really in depth, and it is really amazing how deep this goes and how many people are affected. Maybe as a little bit of a teaser in close, I was wondering if y'all could, because obviously this whole thing is shocking, right? So it's a high bar here, but like going into this investigation, if both of y'all just want to tell us maybe something that you came across that was the most shocking or the most revealing or the most troubling to you as you were going through looking at the wide effects of this software.
Oh, I would, when we first started the project, I tried to take notes of things that shocked Nando, so I could see like, oh, I should incorporate that in my writing. But now that it's been like 2 years, Nando, I'm super curious to hear like what you find shocking now.
Oh man, yeah, I just I find it just like, again, just the totality of it, the totality of the magnitude of the obstacles to overcome for anyone who has to, who wants to be in any way even an activist, or in any, let alone just an uncomfortable reporter or things like that. It really makes you wonder about the near future. Like a world in which we don't have information about what's going on, or can't trust it, or can't is just very, it's very disheartening. And again, it just, the mismatch in terms of how how different the tools are at our disposal is crazy. Like, I mean, it's not like a David versus Goliath. It's not even that. It's something even beyond that. And it just, you have to have clear eyes when you go into anything like this, and do your best to protect yourself. But because they have tools that are just unimaginable.
And like, I don't want to make our listeners like too paranoid, but you maybe need to be a little bit paranoid, because it's like, I'd be curious if y'all have any understanding, like if this seems to be like a novel program, or if there might be other ones that we might not know about, right? Because I can't imagine that the United States government wouldn't be interested in something like this at some level. But what I'm saying is that, like, something like this is really frightening, because you might not think that like you might not be like the highest target, but like look at what the US government was doing in this country, like at mosques all around the country. Like they were sending people to like live in communities for years to like weed out radicalization. And in fact, more often than not, we're just entrapping people and radicalizing people themselves, right? But the idea there being like, who would have thought that some kid in Florida would have been somebody that the United States was interested in then, and like they were finding ways to look into this thing. So it's like, this is something that has beyond just somebody who wants to be like a radical or revolutionary or somebody who speaks truth to power. It's like the ability to sort of get caught in this net is like very high.
Well, I think two things. One is that it's really, even if this government tool is being used on, let's say, a target that is a terrorist or a drug trafficker, human trafficker, it's very hard for innocent people not to get caught up or swept up the way that we see, the same kind of method that was used on Jamal Khashoggi of his inner circle being infected is similar to the way that El Chapo's inner circle was infected. So, that method is still the same. I would say that for now, maybe paranoia is like yellow, orange, not red in the United States. But one thing that we're going to see in the next decade is that this kind of spyware is going to get better. It's going to get more sophisticated. It's going to be harder to detect on your phone. And we're going to see like the knockoffs. We're already seeing it where they're using like a cheaper, maybe not as sophisticated version of spyware, targeting jealous husbands to spy on their girlfriends and wives. So we're going in both directions here. It's like, it's creepier and scarier on the higher echelon, and like more ubiquitous perhaps on the other. I think one thing that really blew me away working on this project is really realizing how connected we are. One thing, the private equity fund that owns this company, you know, the way that they were able to, at one point in the last decade, to get the majority share to buy the NSO Group was through the support of the Oregon Pension Fund. So if you're a firefighter or teacher in Oregon, your pension is tied up in the private equity fund that owns the NSO Group. And to me, that kind of global connectivity is just like, it's like my brain breaks. I feel like I'm like at the end of Men in Black watching like the universes. I'm like, I can't handle it.
Lord, I mean, I saw this story about the FBI informant planted in the Denver Black Lives Matter movement. I can't imagine like our agencies using these sort of skills on or sort of tools on activists to figure out how to manipulate protests and
like stopping the protest before it begins.
Exactly. I mean, it's horrifying.
Well,
the more we know about it, the better. You can,
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and like both of y'all's work has been, you know, really important in getting this out there, and I really appreciate you know, all y'all have done, and I've also just really enjoyed listening to the podcast. It's a good time, even though the subject matter.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah,
it's like a thriller,
fun.
you know.
It is a thriller,
you know. Yeah, you know. Yeah.
Call it a true crime story. Then we'll go to
it's like I think it's like a
top.
you know, like a Bourne Identity type thing. I like to think of myself as like a kind of like a Jason Bourne type, you know, as I'm hosting the podcast. Yeah,
that's how David and I talk about you. Actually,
yeah.
Was that Jason Bourne? Yeah.
Well, Nando and Rose, thank y'all so much. The podcast,
thank you.
Shoot the Messenger. We'll have links below for people to be able to follow and listen to it, and looking forward to you know, to listen to new episodes as they drop. Thank y'all so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.